On January 19th, 2020, 1 Million Moms, a branch of the American Family Association, published the article titled Disney Airs New Demonic Series, The Owl House. In the article, the advocacy group condemns the portrayals of witchcraft and demons within the show, claiming that, quote, the show makes light of hell and the dangers of the demonic realm. In addition to this, they make the claim that these positive portrayals of witches might have a corrupting influence on the children that watch it, as the premise of a young human named Luz learning magic from a demonic witch named Ida does paint the practice of witchcraft as a good thing. The article then links to a petition urging Disney to cancel this dark demonic show, claiming that 160,690 not nice people have taken action against this series. To date, Disney has not issued an official response.
There is much that can be said about this critique and these organizations themselves. But for the moment, I would like to contemplate this fear of witchcraft. What is it about this cartoon that can instill such a call to action? A lot of fans of the show have been dismissive of its connection with demons, as the show isn't very focused on the minutiae of how magic and demons live and function within the setting of the Boiling Isles. But when you look at this show on a thematic level, everything from the characters, their relationships, and the overarching conflicts of the show are influenced by the ways that we have viewed and portrayed witchcraft and the occult. After all, if you were to examine our growing fascination with magic, and witches in particular, you know that the Owl House is just another step in witchcraft's wide and complicated relationship with gender, race, and religion. So, weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus do go about, thrice to thine and thrice to mine, and thrice again to make up 9. Peace! The charms wound up.
Just as a disclosure, when it comes to discussing a topic like witchcraft, there are a lot of perspectives that do have to be considered, especially since there are many cultures throughout the world that have historical and cultural associations with this idea of witchcraft. From indigenous Americans, members of the African diaspora, and practitioners of Wicca and neo-paganism beliefs. All people with vastly different experiences, beliefs, and practices that are all placed under this blanket term of witchcraft. Because many of these cultures have experienced oppression and erasure from people like me, there are going to be some limitations to how we discuss these beliefs and cultures. So, right up front, please do not take me as the final authority for any discussions of witchcraft and the cultures associated with it. And feel free to look in the description for different resources and readings that expand on what we talk about here today.
All that said, let's start off by tackling the broad question, what even is magic? Depending on who you ask, magic can be a lot of different things. At least within the realms of fiction, magic can constitute anything from potions, prophecies, enchanted items, and even abilities as specific as bending an element or as broad as controlling the very fabric of reality. And in the case of the Owl House, it is said that magic is a natural force that can be found within the Boiling Isles and the dead titan that embodies it. And according to Ida, magic is about making a connection with nature and using rituals to tap into the often chaotic forces of magic and focusing it into something controllable. We see this most explicitly with the wild magic that Luz utilizes in the show by channeling the naturally occurring glyphs and symbols that can be found all throughout the Boiling Isles into the different spells that she uses. While this is seen as detached from the systems of magic more commonly utilized by the other residents of the Isles, this is quite in line with our earliest surviving accounts and descriptions of witchcraft and magic.
In early river civilizations like Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, forces like magic had very little distinction from religious and scientific practices. Deities like the Sumerian god Anki and the Egyptian god Heka had strong associations with incantations and rituals that made them integral members of each culture's respective pantheon. And in the case of Mesopotamia, people believed to have magical abilities called the Asipu served vital societal roles such as physicians, priests, and scribes, often supplementing medicinal and scientific practices with these magical rituals. While most will dismiss the more ritualistic practices of such figures, a lot of them went on to accompany our earliest forms of medicine and science. After all, what is medicine if not a substance that removes your sickness like it was a magic potion? And as these civilizations evolved and new civilizations emerged throughout the world, the intersection of magic, science, and religion would remain constant throughout the emergence of Greece, Rome, and Persia. Magical figures like the Seer of Endor and the Oracle of Delphi emerged and were said to have great powers given to them by the gods, like Apollo. And so, tales of kings and commoners alike going to such figures for advice on the future became commonplace throughout the world. Though as these civilizations became more structured and more advanced, many would begin to look upon such figures with skepticism, with philosophers like Plato declaring these magicians and oracles as frauds. Such skepticism has often been a common reaction to such practitioners of these rituals, and villainous figures like Lilith emerged in stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, a mysterious, magical woman that is described as having wings and bird feet, with great associations with lions and owls. While the associations would be later disputed by anthropologists, Lilith would also have some connection with Jewish mythology, with many claiming Lilith to be the first wife of Adam, before being cast out of the Garden of Eden and becoming the mother of demons, with the Masoretic text reading,
"And shall meet wildcats with jackals, the goat he calls his fellow. Lilith, she rests, and she finds rest. There she shall nest the great owl, and she lays eggs, and she hatches, and she gathers under her shadow. Hawks also they gather, every one with its mate."
It's clear to see such parallels between Ida and Lilith with this. However, this association between witches and owls would continue to this day, where it is speculated that Ida is based off of the Mexican folk tale of La Lechuza, a tale which tells of a witch who takes on the form of a woman by day and an owl by night, potentially cursing those who gaze into her eyes. Some speculate that she was cursed in exchange for immortality. Others say it was for losing a child. Whatever the case, La Lechuza is one of many folk tales speaking of mysterious women with magical powers, dangerous and forbidden knowledge, and terrible fates ready to wreak havoc upon their communities.
Though this leads to the question, what could have caused this heavy association with magical women and the forces of evil? Some can point to figures like Lilith and skeptics like Plato for religious and intellectual justification for this. And while that would be partially correct, this rejection of magic and witchcraft didn't see much prominence until the end of the Roman Empire and the rise of Christianity throughout Europe. See, in the days of the Roman Empire, it was common practice for the army to allow some degree of religious freedom within the numerous Roman colonies throughout the world, so long as their beliefs and practices did not interfere with the state. And this would result in some conflict with worshippers of Dionysus, as well as certain Celtic and Jewish populations, some who retained very similar beliefs and practices with previous users of magic. The Romans primarily took issue with alleged sacrificial rituals that the cultures would employ, though there were also concerns with cultures that were ideologically in conflict with Rome's traditions, especially cultures that granted more power to women than was expected in Rome. When Cleopatra became the pharaoh of Egypt and communed with the likes of Caesar and Antony, Roman propaganda often accused her of using witchcraft and sex to coerce the most powerful men in Rome into doing her bidding. The fact is, a lot of this condemnation of magic and these women were a lot less about the actual belief systems at play, and more so about the political power that could be acquired through such condemnation. And once Rome shifted to the rule of Charlemagne, this condemnation of such women would become more prevalent, as the newly Holy Roman Empire and the rising forces of Christianity would impart a more traditional role for these women to play.
Like the earliest users of magic, witches often served vital roles in their communities, not just because they were seen as magic, but because they also acted as doctors, midwives, and advisors to these communities. And if you were a woman in this time, becoming a witch meant having a great degree of freedom and agency within your community. But once Christian ideologies became commonplace throughout Europe, many people, particularly the Catholic Church, condemned this type of independence. In fact, a lot of modern tropes associated with witches today are an extension of this type of condemnation. The witch's broom, the cauldron, eating children, having affairs with the devil, are all inversions of the ideal domestic roles that women were expected to take, being passive, monogamous people that were expected to cook, clean, and rear new children. Granted, the Owl House makes a point of downplaying a lot of these types of tropes, but the root of these tropes becomes a lot more prominent with the different conflicts in the series, especially when we look at the end result of these real-world condemnations. The witch hunts.
When we examine the nearly 500-year period where witchcraft was criminalized and capitally punished, most people tend to write it off as a humorous goof from our history. We accidentally burned people at the stake because they had a bunch of warts. Isn't that hilarious? But it's important to remember that the atrocities that were committed in the name of the witch trials all fit our modern conceptions of a genocide. And like most historical genocides, we won't ever really know for sure how many people fell victim to the witch hunts, with many estimates ranging from 500,000 to upwards of 200,000. Nearly 250,000 people whose lives were cut short because they often didn't fit the societal expectations that were imposed by an increasingly Christian, patriarchal, and industrial Europe. In fact, when examining the wider sociological forces at play within the witch hunts, it's not too hard to see the parallels between the witch trials and the atrocities that were inflicted within the rising African slave trade and the genocide of indigenous people in North and South America that were beginning to occur at this very same time, as argued by the scholar Silvia Frederici in her book, Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women.
Like the slave trade and the extermination of indigenous populations in the New World, the witch hunt stands at a crossroads of a cluster of social processes that paved the way for the rise of the modern capitalist world.
This parallel is important to note since many of the people from the conquistadors, the slave traders, to the different rulers throughout Europe would point to this belief in magic as a sign that such people were less enlightened and needed to be civilized or exterminated in order to maintain progress. Is it any wonder why the Daemonologie, one of the most widespread and influential books on demonology and witchcraft, one of the many texts that went on to influence the show, was written by King James I as a guide to expelling and killing accused witches? The fear of witchcraft has been consistently used by those in power to strip away the rights of marginalized populations the world over.
And even today, in countries like Tanzania, Papua New Guinea, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, and certain parts of India, there are still men, women, and non-binary people who have been imprisoned or killed over accusations of witchcraft, often using it as a smokescreen to punish queer people, practitioners of older religions, and certain political activists aligned against the government.
And before you can chalk this up to those countries being not as civilized as the West, it's important to remember that many of the groups and advocates for such practices often receive assistance and funding from similar groups in countries like the US, Canada, and the UK.
Lobbying organizations like the American Family Association, who incidentally were classified as a hate group in 2005, use subsidiaries like 1 Million Moms to hide their anti-LGBTQ+ ideologies under the guise of protecting children from corrupting media, a sentiment that has only intensified towards the Owl House now that it has grown in popularity. Though most of us like to think that the witch hunts were a byproduct of the past, the ideological forces at play are still alive and wreaking havoc on those who don't align with the standards set by our society. Obviously, because the Owl House takes place in a world wholly populated by these enchanted beings with naturally occurring magical abilities, the treatment of witches like Ida is not an exact comparison to the actual witch hunts. That said, if you were to compare the ideologies at play within the witch hunts to those in the Boiling Isles, the comparison is very pronounced. Just like the real world, wild witches were seen as mystical beings that were attuned to the natural world, and were likewise integral parts of their community, just as Bonesborough comes to rely on Ida for various things. Though at some point, Emperor Bellos would attack and exterminate the wild witches and their practices in his bid to become the ruler of the Boiling Isles. And just like the rulers of our world, it is clear that it is less about the actual ideologies and beliefs of practicing magic, but primarily about controlling the magic of the Isles for himself in order to consolidate power. And it's pretty obvious to see how this conflict can act as an allegory for the sort of oppression marginalized people face for not adhering to traditional perceptions of religion, sexuality, gender, race, or class. I mean, making the main bad guy's base called the Conformatorium isn't exactly subtle. While it would be fine enough to examine the Emperor's Coven representing the witch hunters, I would want to point out one more target of this show's criticism, and it is our modern perceptions of witchcraft in and outside of media.
Today, we live in a thoroughly post-magical thinking world. As much as I respect practitioners of magic, I'm still not much of a believer myself, and most people will also agree. That said, when it comes to this idea of the witch, and all of the persecution real and accused witches have suffered in the past, it's understandable why marginalized people today, particularly women and queer people, would be so attracted to adopting the iconography and ideologies of the witch.
In the 20th century, we saw the evolution of the witch shift from this unambiguous villain to one that became more sympathetic and even aspirational, especially as women began to gain more autonomy throughout the world. Though as time went on, during the second waves of the feminist movement, we see the witch not to be overtly vilified, but something that integrates itself into society. Additionally, this is also when we began to see a morbid fascination surrounding the witch hunts emerge, as the former locations of these executions became tourist spots to those who wanted to gawk at those silly folks who actually believed in magic enough to kill people over it, complete with all the merch one could want to commemorate these past atrocities. Though as the image of the witch became a commodity of the society that created the antiquated stereotypes that primarily comprise that image, there became a desire to co-opt the negative connotations of the witch into a symbol of feminine power and independence. And as more people came to understand the severity of the witch trials and the atrocities that were committed, even the most unambiguously evil characters gained some level of sympathy as time went on.
And I just think that sometimes we think she's just mean and a very bad person, but actually you have to think about her point of view, that it wasn't as happy a time as she wanted it to be, because she just never got what she wanted.
And eventually, there was a diversity in the witch-related media that was out there, with some being more mainstream than others. Though even at their most countercultural, there was still this commonplace acceptance to this idea of the witch, where you too can become a crone of the night with this pentagram necklace for only $7.99 at your local Hot Topic.
No longer was witchcraft this lost art, but something that anyone could aspire to by adopting a certain aesthetic or even going to a special school, taking something that was previously a rejection of unjust authority and integrating it into reinforcing that very same type of authority.
There is a lot about the idea of the witch that the Owl House glorifies, as we are never meant to question the usefulness of magic in the show, and all the characters routinely demonstrate the vital role that magical figures can play in a society. Though even in this seemingly accepting magical world of witchcraft, the show demonstrates how an environment built upon this archetype of independence and freedom can still be susceptible to this pressure to conform. For even where magic is commonplace, witches are expected to choose a coven that fits a very specific role within society, often leaving no room for nuance in those roles. And in modern feminist and queer communities that have greatly adopted the iconography of the witch, they can still offer a lack of nuance in who some will accept in those circles. And we see groups and individuals previously known for advocating for progressive values finding themselves drawing needless distinctions for who really gets to be considered a woman, who really belongs in the LGBTQ+ community. And unlike other witch-centric media, the Owl House is willing to help call out those needless distinctions, even in a humorous way.
That just invalidates all our efforts. If catching that thing is so important, why do anything else? There's no reason to watch any of the other players. That's such a stupid rule!
All of this to say that even amongst other witches, we are still the intellectual descendants of the witch hunters. And it is all too easy to find and expose and cast out all of those who are different. And to all of those who have enjoyed the show and the characters, I hope that you can take this message to heart in the future, as we continue to fight against the witch hunters of our world, by understanding our past, keeping our inner hunters in check, and remembering to be gay, do witchcraft. But, with all that said, thank you for watching. Best wishes.